The billion-dollar empire built on faith. What if I told you that the wealthiest institution on planet Earth doesn't pay taxes, doesn't publish full financial statements, and has been accumulating riches for over 1,700 years? What if I told you this organization owns artwork worth billions that can never be sold, controls one of the most secretive banks in existence, and built its fortune by literally selling tickets to heaven? You're looking at the Vatican, and the story of how it became richer than most countries will change everything you think you know about money and power. Before we dig into this financial empire that's been hiding in plain sight, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button right now. I'm the monetary archaeologist, and I uncover the buried truths about money that the powerful don't want you to understand. Trust me, you'll want to stick around for what's coming. Let's go back to where it all started. Picture Rome in the year 313. Christians have been persecuted, thrown to lions, crucified, and hunted for 3 centuries. Then everything changes in an instant. Emperor Constantine issues something called the Edict of Milan. With one document, Christianity goes from illegal cult to state-approved religion. Imagine that shift. One day you're hiding in catacombs, the next day the emperor himself is on your side. But here's what they don't teach you in Sunday school. This wasn't just about religious freedom. This was the moment money and faith got married. And that marriage would produce the richest dynasty in human history. Think about what happened next. Wealthy Romans, wanting to score points with the new power structure, started donating land to the church. Tons of it. Constantine himself didn't just legalize Christianity, he funded it. He poured imperial wealth into building the first version of St. Peter's Basilica. The message being sent was crystal clear. God's work requires gold, and lots of it. The early church leaders watched this closely. They learned something that every government and corporation knows today. You need a steady revenue stream. You can't build an empire on donations alone. You need guaranteed income. So they invented something brilliant. Something that would make modern subscription services jealous. They called it the tithe. Here's how it worked. Every Christian, no matter how poor, had to give 10% of everything they earned to the church. Not suggested, required. For your soul's sake. Imagine you're a farmer in medieval France. You're barely growing enough wheat to feed your children. Bandits steal from you, the Lord taxes you, disease threatens your crops. But every single year, you have to hand over 1/10 of your harvest to the church, or you're told your eternal soul is at risk. This wasn't charity. This was organized taxation backed by the threat of hell. And it was genius from a financial perspective. Whether the economy boomed or crashed, whether kingdoms rose or fell, that 10% kept flowing upward like a river that never runs dry. Parish to bishop, bishop to cardinal, cardinal to Rome. Always upward, always concentrating. By the year 1000, think about this, the Catholic Church owned roughly 1/3 of all land in Western Europe. Not just church buildings, farmland, forests, mills, vineyards, entire villages. They weren't just saving souls. They were landlords on a scale that would make today's real estate billionaires look like amateurs. But land has a problem. It just sits there. Sure, it generates rents and crops, but for an institution with growing ambitions, the church needed something more liquid. They needed cash, lots of it, fast. So they invented a product that would make them richer than land ever could, and it would eventually tear Christianity in half. Let me ask you something. If you could pay money right now to reduce your suffering after death, would you? What if it wasn't just for you, but for your dead mother, your father, people you loved who might be suffering in the afterlife? How much would you pay? The Catholic Church asked medieval Europeans that exact question, and the answer made them unimaginably wealthy. Enter Indulgences. The sales pitch was beautifully simple. The church taught that after death, most souls go to purgatory, a place of temporary punishment where you burn off your sins before entering heaven. But what if you could reduce that sentence? What if the church, with its spiritual authority, could shave years or even centuries off your suffering? And what if all you had to do was pay? This wasn't some fringe practice. This was official church policy. And it was the medieval equivalent of printing money. Priests traveled from town to town selling these certificates. Families who could barely afford food scraped together coins to buy forgiveness. The church told them it was about salvation. But follow the money. It was about revenue. One salesman stands out in history. His name was Johann Tetzel, a Dominican friar who had the sales skills of a modern marketing executive. He had a jingle that people remembered. As soon as a coin in the coffer rings, the soul from purgatory springs. Can you imagine? A literal jingle for selling salvation. It was brilliant. It was also profoundly corrupt. But here's the thing. It worked. The money poured in. And where did it go? Some went to local churches, sure, but the bulk flowed to Rome to fund the Vatican's most expensive project yet, rebuilding St. Peter's Basilica. The popes wanted a church so massive, so overwhelmingly beautiful, that it would cement Rome as the eternal center of Christianity. Grandeur doesn't come cheap, so they sold heaven to pay for it. And while they were at it, they sold something else: war. The Crusades started in 1096, marketed as holy wars to reclaim Jerusalem from Muslim control. Popes promised that crusaders who died in battle would go straight to heaven. But if you couldn't fight, no problem, just pay the church instead. They called it taking the cross by proxy. You got the spiritual credit, the church got your money, and professional soldiers got funded. It was a win-win for everyone except the people who actually died. But the Crusades weren't just about faith, they were about wealth. When Crusader armies conquered cities, they looted treasures. When new territories were claimed, land was divided up, and the church took its share. By the time the Crusades ended, the Vatican had gained not just spiritual prestige, but hard assets: land, gold, relics, political leverage. Think about the irony here. Priests stood in pulpits preaching about poverty, humility, and the dangers of greed. Meanwhile, the institution they represented was the greediest landlord and tax collector in Europe. The same church that told peasants that wealth corrupts was hoarding gold in Rome on a scale no king could match. This is the pattern you see everywhere in history: the story told to the masses versus the machinery working behind the curtain. And when you understand that gap, that's when you start seeing how power really works. Fast forward to the Renaissance. By the 1500s, the Vatican wasn't just rich, it was decadent. Popes stopped pretending to be humble shepherds. They lived like emperors. They threw lavish parties, commissioned the world's greatest artists, waged wars, and played politics with kingdoms across Europe. Take Pope Alexander VI from the Borgia family. His papacy was so scandalous it reads like a crime thriller. Nepotism, bribery, rumored murders. This was the man claiming to be Christ's representative on earth. Or Pope Leo X from the Medici banking family. He once said, "God has given us the papacy. Let us enjoy it." And enjoy it he did. Feasts, art, opulence, while Rome's poor starved outside the palace walls. But here's where it gets really interesting from a financial perspective. The church officially condemned usury, lending money for interest, as a sin. The Bible was clear about it. And yet, behind closed doors, the Vatican partnered with Europe's most powerful banking families, the Medicis, the Lombards. These weren't just spiritual relationships. These were financial alliances. The papal court became a banking hub. Popes borrowed money to fund wars and building projects. Bankers used their Vatican connections to secure royal contracts. Kings borrowed from bankers who owed loyalty to Rome. It was a triangle of power: monarchy, money, and the church. And at the center, quietly pulling strings, sat the Vatican. But the same financial engine that built cathedrals also built rage. Because by the early 1500s, indulgences had become so blatant, so obviously corrupt, that even faithful Christians couldn't ignore it anymore. Then came Martin Luther, a German monk who looked at the indulgence trade and said, "Enough." In 1517, he wrote 95 arguments against church practices and nailed them to a church door in Wittenberg. His core message was simple but explosive. You cannot buy salvation. Faith is not a transaction.
The Church has turned God into a business. His protest went viral, literally. Thanks to the printing press, Luther's ideas spread across Europe faster than the Church could suppress them. Suddenly, entire nations were questioning Rome. Germany, England, Scandinavia. Millions left the Catholic Church and formed Protestant movements. The Reformation had begun. And here's the brutal irony. The very project that Indulgences were funding, the glorious St. Peter's Basilica, was the same thing that split Christianity in two. The Church's greed for architectural glory destroyed its monopoly on European faith. Wealth built the cathedral, but wealth also built the resentment that tore Christendom apart. The Vatican had learned the hardest lesson in economics. Unchecked greed eventually triggers revolt. But even after losing half of Europe, the institution didn't collapse.
It adapted, because empires built on money always find new ways to survive. Jump forward to the 1800s. For centuries, the Vatican controlled the Papal States, huge chunks of central Italy governed directly by the Pope. But in 1870, Italy unified as a nation and seized all of it. Overnight, the Pope went from ruling territories the size of small countries to being confined to a handful of buildings in Rome. Many thought the Vatican's wealth and power were finished. They were wrong. In 1929, something remarkable happened. Benito Mussolini, the fascist dictator of Italy, wanted the Pope's endorsement to legitimize his regime. So he cut a deal called the Lateran Treaty. The agreement gave the Vatican independence as its own tiny country, Vatican City. But more importantly, it gave the Church a massive payout. 750 million lira in cash and 1 billion lira in government bonds as compensation for the lost Papal States. In today's money, that's billions of dollars. A windfall that pulled the Vatican back from financial irrelevance and launched it into the modern financial world. With that money, the Vatican created the Institute for Religious Works in 1942, better known as the Vatican Bank. On paper, it existed to manage funds for religious orders and Catholic charities. In reality, it became one of the most secretive financial institutions on earth. The Vatican Bank operated with almost no oversight. It didn't publish detailed reports. It didn't answer to regulators the way normal banks do. And it became a magnet for scandal. During the Cold War, there are credible reports that Vatican money helped fund anti-communist groups, blurring the line between faith and espionage. But the darkest chapter came in 1982 with the Banco Ambrosiano collapse. This Italian bank had deep ties to the Vatican Bank. When it went bankrupt, $1.4 billion was missing. The bank's chairman, Roberto Calvi, was found hanging under Blackfriars Bridge in London, his pockets filled with bricks and stones. Initially ruled a suicide, investigators later determined it was murder. Calvi was known as God's banker because of his Vatican connections. Whispers linked the Vatican Bank to money laundering, mafia networks, secret Masonic lodges, and political conspiracies. The Vatican denied wrongdoing, but eventually paid $244 million to Ambrosiano's creditors, without admitting guilt. Think about that. An institution that preaches spiritual purity was tangled up in one of the murkiest financial scandals of the 20th century. And despite investigations, despite murders, despite billions vanishing, the Vatican Bank survived. Because some institutions are too sacred to fail. Even today, the Vatican's true wealth remains a mystery. Officially, it reports modest annual budgets, sometimes even deficits. But those numbers don't include the value of its art, which is literally priceless. Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel ceiling, Raphael's frescoes, sculptures, manuscripts, treasures collected over 17 centuries. These can never be sold, but they represent incalculable billions. The Vatican also owns property worldwide: churches, schools, hospitals, land. It holds investments managed through secretive accounts. Estimates of total Vatican wealth range wildly from $10 billion to $15 billion or more, but nobody really knows. And that's by design. So what's the point of all this? Why does it matter that the Vatican is unimaginably wealthy?
Because the Vatican story is the blueprint for how power really works. This isn't about religion. It's about understanding the machinery underneath every system that asks for your trust while quietly enriching itself. Look at the pattern. The Vatican built wealth through tithes, mandatory taxation disguised as faith. It expanded through indulgences, selling salvation for profit. It partnered with bankers while condemning usury. It made deals with dictators when it suited survival. It wrapped all of this in moral authority, in sacred language, in the unquestionable cloak of God's will. And this same pattern repeats everywhere. Governments print currency into worthlessness while telling you the economy is strong. Corporations preach values while exploiting workers and dodging taxes. Banks promise security while gambling with your deposits and getting bailed out when they fail. They all use the same formula: virtue on the outside, profit on the inside. The Vatican perfected this game 17 centuries ago. Faith on the surface, money underneath. Control the narrative, control the flow of wealth, and wrap it in something people won't question. Here's the real treasure I want you to take from this. Whenever someone tells you to trust a system, whether it's a church, a government, a corporation, or a currency, ask one simple question: who profits from my belief? Follow the money. Always follow the money. Because wealth built in shadows always wears a mask. Sometimes that mask is holiness. Sometimes it's patriotism. Sometimes it's progress or security or the greater good. But behind every mask is the concentration of power. The Vatican's wealth didn't fall from heaven.
It was extracted, manipulated, and defended using the oldest tools of empire. And if you don't learn to see those tools at work, history won't just repeat, it'll run you over. If this opened your eyes to something you hadn't seen before, subscribe to Monetary Archaeologist right now. I dig up the financial secrets buried in history, because the past isn't dead. It's the instruction manual for the present. And if you understand the game, you stop being a piece on the board. Hit that like button, share this with someone who needs to see it, and I'll see you in the next excavation.